The morning sun shimmered over the quiet fishing lake when I turned the key and locked my private gate. I didn't know that small click would unleash a storm. Moments later, HOA Karen screeched into the road, red-faced, breath sharp, ready to explode. Before I tell you how her rights shattered against the truth, stay with me till the end. It was one of those calm weekend mornings where the lake looked like pure glass, reflecting the sky as if the world were paused in peace. I had just finished cleaning my fishing rods when I walked down the gravel path toward the old steel gate that separated my property from the main road. The air smelled of pine and fresh water, and for a moment everything felt under control. But when I pushed the gate shut and locked the heavy brass padlock, I had no idea I was pulling the trigger on a storm. That little click would echo far louder than IX. For months, my private fishing lake, one clearly listed on old land deeds under my grandfather's name, had slowly become a battlefield. HOA Karen, the newly crowned queen of the Neighborhood Association, had convinced herself that the lake belonged to the community. No map said that. No record supported it. Yet in her mind, entitlement replaced reality. She had already held 2 unofficial gatherings by the water, her guests leaving trash, smashing beer bottles, and even damaging my small boat. I tolerated it longer than I should have. But after repairing damage for the 3rd time, I decided enough was enough. That morning, as sunlight filtered through tall trees and danced across the water, I secured the gate with a sense of calm determination. The new lock gleamed slightly in the light, a silent promise that today would be different. I headed back toward my shed to put away tools when I heard the unmistakable rumble of an SUV driving far too fast for the narrow road. Dust rose behind it like smoke. Even before I turned, I knew who it was. Only one person in this community drove with that level of theatrical fury: Karen, the storm in a blonde haircut. Her SUV screeched to a halt beside the gate, wheels skidding on gravel. The door flew open with force, and she stepped out wearing oversized sunglasses, a rigid posture, and enough attitude to choke the morning air. Her voice cracked through the stillness long before she reached me, slicing the peace like broken glass. She marched across the road as if she owned the land beneath her feet, one hand gripping a clipboard overflowing with HOA documents, the other clenched in indignation. I watched her approach, each step packed with outrage and disbelief, as though the locked gate was a personal attack. I stood still, resting my hand lightly on a fishing pole, waiting for her eruption. She jabbed her finger at the locked gate, then at me, then at the sky, as if heaven had assigned her authority. Behind her, more vehicles pulled up, 5 in total, uninvited guests climbing out with coolers, folding chairs, and fishing nets. Their casual laughter clashed with Karen's volcanic fury. She spun toward me with a dramatic gasp, her sunglasses sliding down just enough for me to see her eyes widen. She looked at me like I had committed a crime against humanity. "You can't do this!" her expression shouted. I walked toward the gate, keeping my voice even and steady. The lake breeze brushed past us, cool and calm, a quiet contrast to her escalating temper. She stomped closer, waving her clipboard like a badge. Her steps echoed off the metal bars of the gate, each one a declaration of war. I explained, once again, that this lake was private, documented, verified, inherited. But her head shook violently, blocking out logic. Her guests gathered behind her, watching the drama unfold like a free reality show. She planted her feet, tightened her jaw, and transformed the gravel road into her courtroom. "Open it!" her posture commanded, though her voice hadn't yet spoken. She lifted the clipboard and slapped her palm against it, flipping through pages with exaggerated purpose. The papers fluttered in the breeze, entirely irrelevant to the property boundaries she refused to accept. I could feel her anger rising like boiling steam, ready to burst. Her guests shifted awkwardly, whispering among themselves, confused about whether they were at a lake outing or a neighborhood riot. The lock on the gate glinted in the sunlight, untouched, unmoved, defiant. And suddenly, her patience snapped, loud enough for the forest around us to hear. She lunged forward, thrusting the clipboard inches from my face, as though proximity could transform fiction into truth. Her breath came out fast, shallow, tinted with the scent of mint gum and rage. "I have rights!" Her entire body screamed before the words even escaped her lips. She stepped so close the gravel crackled beneath her heels. Her guests froze, holding their coolers mid-air. I took a slow breath, grounding myself in the calm certainty of property lines and legal documents. She wanted drama. She wanted victory. But all she had was a handful of HOA rules that stopped at my gate. And then, the inevitable eruption. Her voice tore through the quiet lake air, echoing across the water and into the trees. "I have rights!" Her guests winced. Birds scattered from branches. Even the lake itself seemed to ripple from the force of her shouting. She pointed at the gate as if commanding it to obey. But metal doesn't bow to entitlement. I simply stood there, letting her fury burn itself out. She grabbed her phone, hands trembling with fury, and dialed 911 with the intensity of someone reporting a hostile invasion rather than a locked privately owned gate. As she began yelling into the phone, a distant rumble of tires rolled down the road. A police cruiser appeared, unhurried, calm, sunlight reflecting off its windshield. Karen's face lit up with triumph, her entire posture shifting into premature victory. She turned toward me with a smirk, convinced her rights were about to be restored. But I reached into my pocket and pulled out my neatly folded property deed. The officer stepped out, expression relaxed but knowing. Karen didn't notice the shift in energy. She didn't see the truth approaching. She only saw herself winning. She had no idea what was coming next. The police cruiser rolled to a halt in a calm, almost indifferent manner, nothing like the dramatic emergency Karen had imagined. Dust settled around the tires as the officer stepped out, adjusting his vest with the composed air of someone who had seen every form of overreaction imaginable. Karen stood tall beside the locked gate, holding her clipboard like evidence in a courtroom she believed she ruled. I watched the officer's eyes flicker from her to me, then to the padlock hanging from the steel bars. His gaze didn't show alarm, just curiosity. A quiet reassurance washed over me. Truth doesn't rush. It arrives exactly when needed. Karen hurried toward the officer, her steps loud and forceful, almost desperate to fill the silence with her version of justice. The light breeze rustled the leaves, creating a soft backdrop to her frantic gestures. Her guests clustered behind her, unsure whether to stay or retreat. The officer listened patiently, one hand resting on his belt, his expression unreadable as she pointed wildly toward me, the gate, and the lake beyond it. The tension between her confidence and reality was thick enough to feel in the air. I stood a few feet away, posture relaxed, waiting for the officer to meet my eyes. When he finally turned toward me, there was no accusation in his gaze, only expectation, as if he already knew there was more to the story. I reached into my pocket and unfolded the deed, careful not to fan the flames of Karen's outrage with any sign of triumph. The sunlight touched the old paper, illuminating faded ink lines and my grandfather's signature. The officer took it gently, giving it the same weight he would give any official document. Karen's face shifted, uncertainty flickering in her expression for the first time. She leaned forward, squinting as though hoping the words would rearrange themselves. The officer read the boundaries twice, tracing the lines with his thumb. The wind carried faint ripples from the lake, a soothing contrast to the pressure building in Karen's stance. Her guests whispered behind her, shifting their coolers from hand to hand, unsure if they should stay or hide behind their cars. The officer finally exhaled, a slow breath that seemed to unravel the tension in the air. His eyes lifted from the page and met mine with a nod. He understood. The truth was inked in the document, clear and simple. It needed no dramatic performance to be believed. Karen stepped closer, desperation creeping into her movements. The certainty she had worn like armor now began to crack. Her grip on the clipboard tightened until her knuckles turned pale. The officer calmly explained the situation, his voice low, steady, and final. The lake was privately owned. The land was privately owned. The gate was privately owned. Every word sank into the gravel at her feet like heavy stones. Karen's jaw clenched as she processed the meaning. This lake, the one she had claimed as community property, had never belonged to her authority. Her imagined control evaporated in the bright morning sun. A strange silence fell over the group. Even the birds seemed to pause. Karen's guests exchanged awkward glances, shifting uncomfortably as the officer handed the deed back to me. I folded it neatly, the paper now warm from the sun and the officer's hands. Karen's breathing grew uneven, and she turned away for a moment as if searching for a new argument in the trees, the sky, or the gravel beneath her shoes. But the truth was circular, closing in from all sides. She finally looked back at me, her eyes filled with disbelief, frustration, and a hint of humiliation. Her posture stiffened once more, though not with the confidence she arrived with. It was the stiffness of someone pushing against the weight of reality. She raised her clipboard again, flipping through pages as though a hidden rule might magically appear. The papers fluttered, fragile and useless, unable to compete with the land deed in my pocket. Her guests began retreating to their cars, packing away their coolers and chairs, sensing the day's adventure had ended before it started. The officer stepped aside, giving her space to absorb the truths she had fought so fiercely to deny. The wind carried the faint smell of pine and lake water, a peaceful reminder of why I protected this place so fiercely. Karen stood frozen, her anger simmering beneath the surface but powerless to ignite against the simple facts. I watched her look toward the lake, its calm ripples reflecting the sky, almost as if she realized, for the first time, that it had never been hers to control. Her shoulders slowly lowered, no longer squared with entitlement. But just as I thought she might accept the situation quietly, another storm gathered in her expression. Pride rarely surrenders without a final attempt. She spun toward the gate again, gripping the bars with both hands, her knuckles white as she pressed her forehead against the metal. A low breath escaped her, part frustration, part disbelief. She muttered something under her breath, an echo of her earlier claim. "I have rights." But now it sounded smaller, weaker, stripped of its fire. Her guests sat in their cars, engines idling softly, windows half rolled down, waiting for her to accept the inevitable. The officer watched quietly, giving her the dignity of silence. Pride was collapsing, but it wasn't finished struggling. Finally, she turned back toward me, her voice trembling, not with softness, but with the last threads of defiance. She declared she would take this to the HOA board, as if the board could outweigh property law. Her words drifted into the open air, carried away by the wind long before they reached any authority. I simply nodded, letting her rage burn out. The officer returned to his cruiser, satisfied the matter was resolved. Yet as he drove away, Karen's eyes narrowed with new determination. She wasn't finished. My locked gate had exposed the truth, but now, she was preparing something bigger. The officer's cruiser disappeared down the gravel road, its soft rumble fading until the forest reclaimed the silence. Karen stood alone beside the locked gate, her guests now seated in their cars like defeated spectators after a failed performance. The morning sun warmed the metal bars she clutched moments earlier, but her fury had cooled into something heavier, frustration mixed with disbelief. I could almost see the gears turning in her mind, searching for a new angle, a new argument, a new way to reshape reality around her desires. But the truth stood solid in front of her, unshakable and immovable, like the gate itself. She walked slowly back to her SUV, each step heavy with the weight of pride cracking beneath her. The gravel crunched under her heels, a small but sharp reminder that she hadn't won this round. Her guests kept their eyes forward, avoiding her gaze as if afraid her frustration might spill onto them next. I watched her open her door, but instead of getting in, she paused, half-turned, chin lifted slightly, as though a new plan had just been stitched together in her mind. There was something unsettling about that pause. It carried the energy of a storm rearranging itself after failing to strike. 15 minutes later, the quiet road wasn't quiet anymore. 3 additional SUVs rolled in, slow, confident, purposeful. I recognized 2 of the drivers instantly. HOA board members Karen had almost certainly dragged here with a dramatic plea. They stepped out with uncertain expressions, clearly unprepared for the emergency she had described. Karen rushed toward them, waving her clipboard, voice low but urgent, filling their ears with embellished descriptions of my illegal gate. my uncooperative behavior, and the community chaos she believed I was responsible for. Their eyes shifted between her and the lake, their doubt growing with every step. I approached calmly, the property deed already in my back pocket, warm from the sunlight. The board members greeted me politely, though awkwardly, as if caught between loyalty and logic. Karen stood beside them, arms crossed tightly, jaw clenched, her entire posture vibrating with anger. The board members began asking routine questions, their voices polite but hesitant. I answered each one clearly, offering the deed the moment it was relevant. The document changed everything. Their faces shifted from uncertainty to clarity as they traced the boundaries with their fingers. Karen's confidence weakened again, her eyes widening in quiet devastation. "It's not community land," one board member murmured, almost apologetically. Karen's shoulders tensed. The breeze blew faint ripples across the lake, as if nature itself were nodding in agreement. Another board member pointed to the boundary lines on the deed. "This entire area falls outside HOA jurisdiction," he explained gently. Karen's mouth opened slightly, but no sound came out. Her clipboard slipped a little from her grasp, the papers shifting like leaves losing their hold in autumn. The truth had cornered her again, calm, patient, undeniable. Her guests looked on from their cars, the atmosphere thick with silent disbelief. Karen didn't give up easily. She never did. She took a deep breath, straightened her shoulders, and tried again, her voice trembling but forceful. She spoke about community traditions, about lake access, about previous gatherings, held there as if repetition could magically grant ownership. But every word she spoke was met with the same response: the lake wasn't hers to manage. The board members tried to be kind, offering sympathetic nods, but sympathy can't rewrite property law. Her desperation seeped through her tone, making her words sound less like arguments and more like attempts to hold on to a crumbling illusion. When logic failed, she turned back to her guests, hoping for backup, validation, anything. But they had grown quiet, defeated by the clear facts laid out before them. One by one, they began packing up their coolers and folding chairs, offering awkward waves before driving off. Their tires rolled over the gravel softly, each departure pulling another thread from Karen's unraveling confidence. The road slowly emptied, leaving her alone with the board members, the wind, and the locked gate she despised. Her breathing grew sharper, her frustration heavier, as the realization sank deeper: she had no army left behind her. Finally, the board members gently suggested she return home and drop the issue. Their words were careful but firm. They promised to review the documents, knowing full well the review would only confirm what they had already seen. Karen stared at the ground, her shadow falling across the gravel like a wilted shape. The lake behind me shimmered peacefully, unaffected by her rage. She looked up at me one last time, her eyes filled with a mixture of anger, shame, and disbelief. Pride didn't just fall that day, it shattered, each fragment reflecting a truth she had tried desperately to ignore. She walked to her SUV with short, rigid steps. The board members followed her with slow, careful movements, offering soft goodbyes before returning to their vehicles. As Karen drove away, the dust behind her lifted gently into the sunlight, lighter than the weight she carried on her shoulders. The road became quiet again, the forest returning to its gentle whispers. The lake rippled calmly, as if reclaiming its rightful silence. I stayed by the gate, feeling a quiet satisfaction settle into my chest. Justice didn't need to roar that day. It simply stood firm, like the lock on my gate. Later that evening, as the sun dipped behind the trees and painted the lake in gold, I walked the shoreline and felt a calm I hadn't felt in weeks. Karen hadn't just lost a battle, she had faced the truth she spent so long avoiding. And the truth always wins in the end. The next morning, an HOA email arrived in my inbox, a formal apology from the board, acknowledging the misunderstanding and confirming full respect for my private land. Karen never returned to the gate again. Entitlement had met its limit, and the lake remained exactly what it always was, mine.